Blog Talk Radio.
Mi chiamo Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit Neye Odwirada Medinde Odwirafo Kwesi Nehem Ptah Akan Akwamuman Amaruka Atifi Odwirafo Odwiraman mu. Greetings to all Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit people, meaning Africans, black people. Today is Odwira Day, Purification Day. My name is Odwirafo Kwesi Nehem Ptah Akan. Odwirafo of the Akwamu nation in North America, within Odwiraman, the purified nation, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere. Yet I say we thank you once again for tuning into the broadcast. The chat room is opened up. If you have any questions or comments in the chat room, you must log in as a user in order to interact. If you have any questions or comments on the phone line, simply hit the number 1 so that we can see that your hand is raised. We have 4 broadcasts on a weekly basis. We have Akan for Nanasom, ancient authentic Akan ancestral religion on Joda on Monday nights, where we deal specifically with the Akan expression of ancestral religion Nanasom. First and foremost, because we are Akan. Secondly, because of the misinformation being propagated regarding Akan culture, ancestral religious practice, ritual practice, philosophy, cosmology, and so forth, coming from misinformed individuals in the Western Hemisphere, as well as those on the continent who have embraced the infection of white culture and pseudo-religion and have woven those infections into the presentation of the ancestral traditions. So we speak of ancient, authentic Akan ancestral religion. Our people originating in the ancient Khan land, Khanat, ancient Nubia, migrating a couple of thousand years ago west to reestablish Akana civilization, the Khanat empire in the western part of the continent. 1,000 years later, because of Muslim invasions moving further south towards the region of contemporary Cote d'Ivoire and Republic of Ghana, reestablishing the Akana civilization over 1,000 years ago in those areas in the forest regions and the savannah belt and so forth. And hundreds of years later, some of our people being taken from that region during the Musuo Ketie, the Great Perversity, the enslavement era, and forth into North, Central, South America, the Caribbean, and Europe as a result of that forced migration, the enslavement era. But we maintained our ancestral religious traditions, practices in our blood circles. The Akan tradition in Suriname, South America, is called Winti. The Akan tradition in Jamaica is called Obia. The Akan tradition in North America is called Hoodoo, from the Akan term Undu, meaning root work, medicine, and so forth, plant life, but also meaning to become heavy with the spirit through spirit possession, through kanche, or conjure, and so forth. So we deal with ancient, authentic Akan ancestral religion, born of our blood circles on Jodan Monday nights. On Awukuda, Akwada Wednesday nights, we have Egua, which is Marketplace Day. We showcase Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit African businesses, organizations, and institutions, those who are serving our community in a positive capacity, those who have maintained their ancestral religious values in the context of their service, which informs their service to the community. We showcase those businesses, organizations, and institutions. Individuals come on and share their information with us. We also, in that context, have published our Okom economic development model, which is an economic development model rooted in our ancestral religious values. There's therefore a holistic approach to economic development in the context of Amaniye nationism for Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. And we go into detail about that on Egua Marketplace Day. On Yauda, which is also Yada and Abada Thursday night, we have Amain Sem, which means affairs of the Oman, affairs of the nation, specifically the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit nation in general, specifically Odwiraman, the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit nation, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere. Odwira means purification. Oman means nation. Mani also means land of the setting sun, the west. Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people who are descendant from those who were forced into the Western Hemisphere during the Musuo Ketie, the great perversity, the enslavement era. We have reconstituted ourselves in this region of the Earth Mother, reestablished and purified ourselves, reestablished our ancestral religious practices. We were empowered by those ancestral religious practices on the best means by which to wage war against the whites and their offspring and force the end of enslavement in the Western Hemisphere, building independent sovereign nations, states, settlements, black towns, and so forth. We build on that foundation. We deal with affairs of the nation, affairs of the Oman, issues that are confronting us as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, and how to address them from an Amaniye or nationist perspective. We deal with Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, African black nationism, the purification of nationalism. It is an approach to nation building, restoration, rooted in our ancestral religious values, which is the only full holistic approach to nation building. You can't have a secular nationalism and think that you're going to build an Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit nation. So we deal with the nationism, which is the purification of nationalism, and we approach our issues from a nationist perspective. That's what we deal with on Amain Sim Affairs of the Nation. Tonight is ODWIRA Day, Purification Day. In the language of ancient Kemet, Jira means purification. It also means to celebrate a ceremony of purification. In the Akan language, which is of course descendant directly from the language of ancient Kanit and Kemet, Nubia and Egypt, the term ODWIRA means purification, and ODWIRA also means to celebrate a ceremony of purification. The same term with the proper definitions and vocalization. So we deal with ancestral religion, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, or African ancestral religion on this broadcast, purification of concepts, purification of cosmology, purification of understanding, and so forth, and how Nanasom, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, or African ancestral religion impacts every aspect of our lives. In essence, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, or African ancestral religion, which we call Nanasom in general, is the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. That means through ritual, we incorporate those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to incorporate in order to harmonize our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. And through ritual, we reject those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to reject in order to restore balance to our thoughts, intentions, and actions, and thus realign ourselves with divine order. Our ancestral culture as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people is to execute our function, divinely allotted function in creation, as we align every thought, intention, and action with divine order every moment of every day. That is our way of life. And when we make legitimate mistakes throughout the course of our lives, then we engage the ritual process to ritually incorporate divine law and then ritually restore divine balance to our lives so that we can realign ourselves with order. Our culture is the divine acceptance, the divine law, love of order, and the divine rejection, the divine hate of disorder and its purveyors. So when we deal with ancestral religion, incorporating law and restoring balance so that we can get back on track with our executing our function in creation and aligning every thought, intention, and action with divine order every moment of every day, this is how ancestral religion impacts every aspect of our lives. This is why we must have a purified understanding of what ancestral religion is and how its ramifications, how it impacts every aspect of our lives. Tonight, the broadcast is Akosan, Transition and Return, Adult and Child Death and Rebirth. We published a blog a few months ago on our ODWIRA blog website called Akosan. We wanted to go through this information in detail. We have published a previous document, Amani Hunu, Overcoming Intergenerational and Transcarnational Suffering. We talked about a specific manifestation of people going through a transition process, making their transition. There are sometimes when people make their transition where it's an adult or a child, and they return to a certain circumstance when they're reborn into a certain clan and so forth, and they suffer a number of traumatic experiences. Sometimes those traumatic experiences are born of what was being done in the previous lifetime being carried over into the current lifetime. That is not, however, always the case. This particular article is dealing with different situations. When transition takes place, people are engaged in certain activities that are positive, but transition takes place and people have questions about the nature and ramifications of the death of an adult, the transition of an adult, as well as the transition of a child. When a child makes transition early and people are shocked because of the transition, the death of a child, they have questions about why did this happen and so forth. While we talked about the other situation where there has been some negativity in previous existences and that those open wounds are brought into the new incarnation or rebirth, in this particular article we want to deal with a different aspect, a different angle of it. So Akosan is an Akan term comprised of ko, meaning to go, and sign, meaning return. Those terms exist in the language of ancient Kemet as well with the same meanings. Akosan means he or she has gone, ko, and returned. Sign. Akosan, this is a name. You can, like we utilize this name for Malcolm X Kwabena Akosan. That's the name we use in Akhan to refer to Malcolm X and so forth. But this is a name given to a child who is recognized to have been one who has transitioned via Owu, death, and has returned to the world once again via Bebra, reincarnation. Sometimes the child dies right after birth or not long after birth and so forth, less than a year, sometimes more than a year, makes their transition. The mother becomes pregnant once again, and that same individual is brought back into the womb and returns to the womb. And when people see that this is the same spirit, the name is given Akosan. One of the titles, one of the names is given Akosan, meaning he or she has gone and returned. So, every child is critical to understand with regard to reality, and our cosmology is a reflection of reality. It's Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. We're talking about Bebra, or reincarnation, rebirth. Very often when we hear that terminology, the only context we can place it in is the misinformation that has been put forward by the Hindus, as well as Buddhists and others in Asia and so forth, as well as New Age pseudo-occultists and so forth, the whites and their offspring mixing different pseudo-philosophies together and manufacturing various ideas. They have misinformation. We need to talk about Bebra, or rebirth, reincarnation, from the true perspective. And the manner in which we return to the world is different than the manner in which the whites and their offspring return to the world, because we have different steps in that transition and return process that they cannot access, inclusive of being given a kra and krawa, a soul, a divine consciousness, a divinity, to dwell in our head region by Inyamewa and Inyameo, Amenet, Amen, Mawu, and Lisa, the great mother and great father, prior to incarnating into a womb. So we're given a divinity to dwell with us, a sign to us that installs itself in our head region of our spirit body. We're also given a divine function to execute in creation. The whites and their offspring never have that experience. They do not go through that step. So they're editorializing on reincarnation and what happens after death and the stages you go through it is a bunch of misinformation. So we need to understand the true perspective, the full perspective through direct experience of our people. Every child born in the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, or African Black community is an ancestress or ancestor who has returned. Sometimes it is an elder or eldress who has returned. Sometimes it's not an elder or eldress. Sometimes it's somebody who did not achieve that level of spiritual cultivation. to become one of the Nananom Mpanyinfo, the spiritually cultivated elders and elderesses. Sometimes they were not on that level when they made their transition, but sometimes they are one of the group called Nananom Mpanyinfo, the spiritually cultivated elders and elderesses within the community. And when they make their transition, they become Nananom Nsamanfo, spiritually cultivated Nsamanfo or ancestral spirits. So sometimes it's an elder or elderess returning. This means specifically that hours, even minutes, prior to the Afurakani man and Afuraitkaitnit woman copulating, this ancestor or ancestress was dwelling in Asamando, the ancestral realm. If you take the example of yourself, if you were someone who was forced into enslavement 200 years ago, taken from the continent of Afuraikai, Africa, forced into the Western Hemisphere, you escaped from plantations with a group of other Afuraitkaitnit individuals of your clan. You established an independent settlement, for example, in the Dismal Swamp area in Virginia, North Carolina, and so forth. Maintained your independence, waged war against the whites and offspring, had children. Your children grew up. They got married within that group that you all established, that independent settlement you established. They had children, which are your grandchildren. Your grandchildren grow up. They connect with other people within the larger group. They become married. They have children, which are your great-grandchildren, and so forth. Eventually, you make your transition. You become an ancestor or an ancestress. You are in Asamando, the ancestral realm. You are watching your great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren being born and raised, and they're pouring libation to you, communicating with you, and so forth. You're guiding them through dreams, guiding them through spirit possession during rituals, ancestral rituals, guiding them at the ancestral shrine, guiding them when they're pouring libation and leaving food offerings for you, guiding them throughout the course of the day at critical junctures and giving them the right information to push and nudge them spiritually and sometimes energetically away from certain things and towards other things and so forth. You're guiding them throughout the course of their lives. As long as they're paying attention and being receptive, they're receiving your guidance and acting upon it in a harmonious way. Generations later, a couple of 100 years later, it is time for you to return into the world. Before you are drawn into the world, you are drawn up to Inyamewa and Inyame, Amenet, and Amen, Mawu, and Least, the Great Mother and Great Father, Supreme Being. They direct a specific divinity, a male divinity if you're male, a female divinity if you're female, to take up residence in the head region of your spirit body. That force takes up residence in the head region, just like your physical body has a force or a smaller entity taking up residence in the head region of your physical body, which is the brain, which regulates all the functions in the body. Your spirit body, your sunsum, has a force that takes up residence in the head region, the apex of your spirit body. That is the Okra, or Okra, the soul, the divine consciousness called Ka or Kaet in ancient Kemet, Ori Inu in the Yoruba tradition, the spiritual head, inner head, Seili Do in Vodun, and Chi in Igbo. So this divinity, which contains the divine function you are to execute in creation, that has been given to you by the Supreme Being, takes up residence in your head region. Now you have a force in your head that's always pulling you towards thoughts, intentions, and actions that are in harmony with your divine function, and pushing you away from thoughts, intentions, and actions that are out of harmony with your divine function. You always have that monitor within your head region when you develop a relationship with that deity throughout the course of your life ritually, which is our responsibility. It's no longer experienced as simply a pull or a push, a force in the head region. The deity will show himself to you, show herself to you, communicate directly with you, and so forth. So when you receive that from Inyame wa Inyame, you are now a spirit, a sunsum with an Okra, divinity. Now you are sent back to Asamando, the ancestral realm, to await reincarnation, Bebra, rebirth. Your great-great-great-great-great-great great-great-granddaughter has grown up. She's married an Afurakani man. They're married. They begin to copulate. And that energy drawn together, fused together by Heru, Cheche, as we call her in Akan, and Afi, as we call her in Akan, and Oshun in Yoruba, and Azili or Ezuli in Vodun, and so forth. She fuses together your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter and her husband. She fuses them together through copulation, the central attraction that's the precursor to procreative activity. She fuses together in a harmonious way the complementary opposites, which are the sperm and ovum. She fuses them together, and through that process, that energetic process, your spirit is drawn into the womb. Now, as we said earlier, specifically hours, even minutes prior to the Afurakani man, who is the husband of your great-granddaughter, and her, prior to them copulating, you were an ancestor and ancestress dwelling in Asamanda. Once copulation took place, fusion of the sperm and ovum occurred, creating a zygote. The spirit of the ancestor or ancestress, the elder or elderess, was drawn into the womb. This happens with all of us. This is what happened with you. This is how you got here when you were born. You were an ancestor or an ancestress. Some were elders and elderesses and so forth. You were drawn into the womb in this process. This is what happens with all Afurakani people. The key here is that once that spirit is drawn into the womb, you now have an adult spirit residing in a fertilized ovum. As cell division takes place, mitosis takes place, this spirit is dwelling therein. He or she has not lost his or her identity. He or she is a sumsum, a spirit, with an okra, a soul, a deity dwelling in the head region. He or she has a divine function to execute in creation. Over the coming 9 months, the body within which this adult spirit dwells has grown into a quote-unquote baby. And eventually this adult spirit is born into the world in the body of a quote-unquote baby. You're an adult, but you're operating through a body that's not fully formed, so you can't express yourself as an adult through a body that's not fully formed. Your body, your arms and legs and everything are not fully developed and strong and so forth. You can't operate like you would normally operate through a full-grown body. The brain is not fully developed yet, so even though you as a spirit have all of the knowledge and wisdom and accumulated experience that you could express spiritually, now that you're operating through an undeveloped body, it's difficult to express that. The vocal cords are not fully developed. The eyes and ears and neurons and so forth are not fully developed, so you're an elder and elderess or adult spirit operating through an undeveloped quote-unquote body of a quote-unquote baby. This adult has not lost his or her spiritual identity. As we've said, however, because the body and brain within which he or she is operant is not fully developed, this adult spirit cannot fully express his or her thoughts, intentions, etc. When we attune to the quote-unquote child spiritually, we can attune to the Abosom, the deity who governs their head, and those who are receptive can see that divinity and communicate with him or her, and thus that divinity governs their divine function. We can attune to the Patriclan and Matriclan Abosom, the deities who empower the adult spirit manifest as a child. When we talk about the Patriclan and Matriclan divinities, we have Patriclan and Matriclan deities that have governed our clans for thousands of years on the Patriclan and Matriclan side. When a male releases a sperm cell, the energy that animates the sperm cell is a dispensation of energy from the Patriclan Abosom, that divinity who has been protecting the Patriclan ancestresses and ancestors for thousands of years. The ovum is animated by the energy of the Matriclan, female Matriclan Abosom divinity who has protected the ancestresses and ancestors of the Matriclan for thousands of years. So when the sperm and ovum fuse together, you have a newly formed body. The phenotype and the morphological characteristics and so forth manifest through the DNA of the mother and the DNA of the father and so forth, create a physical body that has never been created before. It's a blending of two different people with two different blood circles. They blend those DNA components together and fashion this new body. The energy that animated the sperm cell, energy that animated the ovum cell, the dispensation from the patriclan abosome, male abosome from the father's side, the matriclan abosome, the female abosome from the mother's side, gives further nuance and contours to this newly formed body. Then you take up residence in that body that has DNA material from the father, Y chromosomal DNA, mitochondrial DNA from the mother. So you will have certain characteristics as they have blended those physical, that DNA together. But then also you'll have the spiritual characteristics and attributes influenced by the patriclan and matriclan abosome that have governed your clans for thousands of years. So you have the patriclan divinity, the matriclan divinity, the energy fusing, and then you take up residence within that, and you bring the deity that governs your head. So it's a unique combination of the deity that governs your head and the fusion of the patriclan and matriclan energy in an ahinasa, a triangle, a unique configuration of energy. So you take up residence within that zygote. That blending of energy in a unique configuration defines not only your phenotype but your spiritual characteristics and allows you to manifest that and express that in the world. When we attune to the child, the quote-unquote child, which is an adult spirit operating through a child's body, a quote-unquote baby body. When we attune to the child, quote-unquote, spiritually, we can attune to the abosome who governs the head, and thus their divine function. We can attune to the patriclan and matriclan abosome, the deities who empower the adult spirit, manifest as a quote-unquote child. We say that for a reason. We can also attune to the desires and needs and expressions of this adult, quote-unquote child. Through education and development as the quote-unquote child grows into his or her adulthood, on the surface, we can help bring out what has always been contained within the spirit of the individual. This individual has been in existence for thousands of years. The accumulated experience of life within creation and in the ancestral realm for thousands of years is contained within the sum of the individual, the spirit of the individual, and within the krawa, the soul of the individual. That can come to the surface as the child, quote-unquote, grows and develops, and their physical body grows and develops, and their melanin, their katnut, their abatun fully matures and so forth. They can access those memories physiologically. Of course, they can access them through ritual spiritually. They can communicate with their kra, their soul, divine consciousness, the krawa, invoke that divinity, draw down or pull down those memories, download those memories, that accumulated experience. They can search their sum, their spirit, and bring that information out, but it can also be affected through the full development of their physical body, their melanin and dominant physical body. As a child, an adult operating through a child's body, if the body is not fully developed, you learn how to communicate with the spirit of the child. The spirit is an adult spirit. Operating through a child's body, they have desires, needs, and so forth. We begin to attune to their spirit first. When you hear a child crying, at first, and you're a new parent, at first, the various instances of the child crying sound the same. As you begin to attune to the spirit of the quote-unquote child, of the adult operating through the child's body, you can determine the difference or discern the difference between a cry that represents hunger, a cry that represents pain, a cry that represents uncomfortability or they need to be changed and so forth, a cry that represents they are tired and they need to go to sleep, but they're having a difficult time going to sleep. There are nuanced differences that you can take note of because you're attuning to the spirit of the adult operating through the body of the child. If the body was fully developed and they could communicate through a fully developed brain and so forth, they can just tell you what's going on. But since they're operating through a newly formed body that's not fully developed, you have to attune to their spirit and see how they express themselves. So this is what's taking place on a regular basis as they're growing and developing childhood, pre-adolescence, prepubescence, puberty, and so forth, into adulthood. They begin to flower. That ancestral memory keeps manifesting itself. They begin to attune to who they are. When we're practicing ancestral tradition and we're taking our children to the river and cleansing their head from the time they're small children, teaching them to establish a relationship with their nanano nsamanfo, the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors, and the abosom that govern them, that allows them to begin to unfold that memory, that ancestral memory, so they can access that. They begin to talk about things that took place in previous lifetimes, talk about things that are happening now with greater insight and wisdom that an average child wouldn't typically have, and so forth. Their experience is beginning to show, to manifest, their ancestral memory, accumulated experience. That's why we say through education and development, as the child, quote-unquote, child grows into his or her adulthood, on the surface, we can help bring out what has always been contained within the spirit of the individual. Now, some adults, including some elders and eldresses, make decisions which may put them in harm's way, yet will benefit the overall community. They know that if they are successful in their mission, all will benefit. Yet if they are not successful in their mission and succumb to death or transition as a result of placing themselves in harm's way, they know the community will benefit. This is because they know that their transition will actually pull the community together to form a tighter bond in support of one another. We engage this process, many of us have engaged this process on more than one occasion. We have made decisions which were clearly placing us in harm's way because of the work that we do. However, we made the decision to move forward anyway, for we knew that if we were successful, we would reach more people. If we succumb to death transition as a result of the circumstances we had placed ourselves in, the community who supports us would form a tighter bond. The work we have done up to this point would take on a new significance as people who never heard of us would become aware, and thus positively impacted on a level that has not yet been reached. The community would therefore benefit from our decision. Of course, Adebisa divination is always part of the process when making such decisions, placing us in control of the outcome. So those of us who engage the divinatory process, the oracular divinatory process, we have a relationship with what is called Owuo and Akan. Owuo is the male divinity of death. Owuo Berima, the male divinity of death. Owuo Ba, the female divinity of death. We have a relationship with this contractive force, divine force in creation. A hoodoo man, hoodoo woman has a relationship with Owuo Berima and Owuo Ba. And Okunfo, a warrior or warrioress, has a relationship with Owuo Berima and Owuo Ba. One who is a diviner, constantly engaging the ancestral realm and the Nsamanfo, has a relationship with Owuo Berima and Owuo Ba, these male and female forces of divine contraction, of quote-unquote death. We're constantly walking the line of the physical world and the spirit realm. We have a relationship which keeps us on track to make sure we're on constant focus, pinpointed focus on what our function in creation is. We also have that relationship because we attune to Owuo Berima and Owuo Ba so that we can learn what we need from them and place our enemies in a position where Owuo Berima and Owuo Ba, the male and female forces of contraction, death, can snatch up our enemies whether we're waging war physically, through raising up metal armaments, or through chemical and biological weapons of warfare, root work being the precedent for that, or in any other fashion. We invoke them to assist us to eradicate our enemies. We invoke them so we can understand our place in creation, how close we are to Asamando, how close to the edge we are, and to make adjustments when necessary. When it's time for us to transition, we already have that foreknowledge. People who are Adebisafo, who are diviners and so forth, we don't operate in the world in just a mundane fashion. We're looking 2, 3, 4 steps ahead because of that oracular capacity that we've been given to serve the community, but also to see what is unfolding before it unfolds. So we always have an intrinsic, innate relationship with Owuo Bedima, Owuo Ba. But all of us have, on some level, that relationship. So some adult spirits, as we say, including some elder and elder spirits, pre-incarnation, make those similar decisions based upon accumulated decisions and behaviors of previous existences, meaning placing themselves in harm's way. If you saw one of your relatives or loved ones and so forth trapped in a burning building, you saw children of your clan trapped in a burning building, you would immediately rush into the building to rescue the children. You're going to place yourself in harm's way without contemplating or calculating. You're going to place yourself in harm's way to recover the children. If you're successful, you'll recover the children and you'll be restored as well. If you're not totally successful, then the children will be saved and you succumb to death or transition. Either way, things are in balance because you brought those growing and developing ancestors or ancestresses out of harm's way. If it was time for you to transition, all that will simply do is bring the community together, form a tighter bond, create a culture that's rooted in order and respect for the life that we have. Some adult spirits, including some elder and elder spirits pre-incarnation, before they enter into the world, make similar decisions based upon accumulated decisions and behaviors of previous existences, meaning they will rush into a burning building, quote unquote, because they know they need to extract some of their people from that burning building. Some people will rush into or go into a burning, quote unquote, building or clan that has been going through some trauma over generations to bring strength and edification to fortify that clan. They know what they are going into pre-incarnation. They will just thus be drawn into a womb of descendants in a certain region, within a certain blood circle of the larger clan, which could ultimately put them in a position where they are placed in harm's way even as quote-unquote children, adult spirits in the bodies, vessels of quote-unquote babies. Yet, they make such decisions knowing that if they transitioned as a quote-unquote child, these are elder spirits in the ancestral realm deciding about their direction to the specific lineage that they're going to be drawn into based on previous behaviors and so forth, and their alignment with the divinities in previous lifetimes. They're drawn to a specific blood circle, a specific line within the specific blood circle. They're making these decisions. They're going to go into this specific branch of the family, this specific branch that's a little bit weaker than the other branches, the specific branch where a great deal of suffering has taken place. The elderous spirit, the ones who are spiritually cultivated, can bring some illumination, can bring some power, can bring some edification, bring some fortification to this branch of the overall clan, so they make a conscious decision to go into that branch, knowing that if they transitioned as a child, in that branch, because this is a branch that's kind of weak. They may be open and porous with regard to their spiritual aura, the different people in the clan, and drawing all kinds of parasites and parasitical entities and events towards them. And the children born within these clans are suffering in traumatic experiences. But we're going into the fire, going into the burning building and so forth, into that particular clan. They're knowing that if they transition as a child after they have been born through that clan, they would simply return to Asamando, the ancestor realm, the place they just left, reincarnated from a few years ago. So if they were a child that's 4 or 5 or 6 years old and they went through a traumatic experience and transitioned, this was an elder spirit that 6 years ago was in the ancestor realm. They incarnated, came out of the womb, lived for 4, 5, 6 years, and then that traumatic experience happened and they transitioned and went right back to the ancestral realm where they were at just 6 years ago as an elder or elders. They know that as a result of their quote-unquote transition back to Asamando, the ancestral realm, the clan would form a much tighter, stronger bond because of the shock and the trauma with regards to the loss of a quote-unquote child. The clan will bond together, form a tighter bond, a stronger bond. It would facilitate unity in the family and help to heal old wounds. It would work to urge others to begin to communicate with their ancestresses and ancestors as they contemplate their own mortality and begin to become grounded in their life purpose, Nkrabia, the divine function in creation. This leads to creating a harmonious environment, an ancestral culture, which will facilitate the future return of the very same adult spirit who transitioned as a baby, a quote-unquote baby. When the quote-unquote baby first incarnated, the family or clan may not have been bonded to the degree that they should have been. Then after transition, that same adult spirit returns, reincarnates a few years later as the bond in the earthly family has been solidified, creating a harmonious environment or culture which benefits not only this particular returning adult child spirit, but all others who will come forward. This is one of the many expressions of our transcarnational inheritance, which has manifested for thousands of years up to this moment in all of our clans. We must always assess the nature of transition and return, rebirth. We can thereby recognize our specific role in facilitating the development of the returning adult child spirit and the bonding of the clan and community in the transcarnational process. We talk about transcarnational, meaning return through successive reincarnations. So while there are instances where you have individuals who are engaged in disorder, engaged sometimes in criminality and so forth, and they transitioned in that disordered state. It's akin to someone being cut and having a wound, an open wound. And that wound keeps getting open, and as long as it's open and the scab does not form, if it remains open, then it's always open to reinfection. Some people transition in a disordered state because they were not living in harmony with divine order, not executing their function. They're operating in a lower level of the ancestral realm. Then they're drawn back into a womb generations later. The wound spiritually has never been closed. So they're an open wound. They have never engaged in any kind of spiritual cultivation, not to the degree to which they should have when they transitioned previously and operating in a lower level of the ancestral realm. So they return still the same weak kind of spirit they were when they first transitioned over 100 years ago. And they're drawn magnetically into a weaker branch of the family where people are operating on the same frequency as they are. People are irresponsible, self-destructive. Some people may be alcoholics. Some people may be drug addicted. Some people may be just self-destructive in a number of different ways. They are drawn to people on that same frequency. It's similar to if you're listening to a radio station, when you tune into one specific station, the only thing you can hear coming through the radio is what's coming from that station. You're on the same frequency, and everybody who's attuned to that frequency, they can hear what's coming from the transmissions coming from that station. They can't hear the transmissions coming from any of the other stations until they change frequency. We're operating on a lower, weaker frequency, and we're on the same level as other people who are operating on that lower, weaker frequency, and then we're drawn magnetically based on what we did in previous lifetimes. Our behaviors, our conditioning led us to this weaker spiritual state, energetic state, and therefore we're drawn into the branch of the family, the branch of the clan that has been operating at this weaker state as well, and born through a womb, operating through this weaker state. And these are the kind of people who may be neglectful of their children, allowing their children to walk out into the street when they're 2 years old because they're too busy drinking and partying or looking on their cell phone or something like that. They're drawn into this weak state because they were engaged in some self-destructive behavior in a previous incarnation. The womb was still open. We talked about that when we talked about Amanihunu, overcoming intergenerational and transcarnational suffering. That's one specific manifestation of how someone can come into the world, suffer as a child, suffer, for example, different traumas and injuries and things like that because they were drawn into a weaker branch of the clan because they were operating on a weaker frequency previously. That's one manifestation. What we're talking about here is when you have an elder or elderist spirit, a spiritually cultivated ancestor, who navigated life in a harmonious fashion, mastered life in a harmonious fashion, lived as part of Asamando amongst the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. When it's time for them to return to the world, they deliberately go through one of the branches of the clan that has been weak and suffering so that they can come and build and fortify and strengthen that branch of the clan. Because all of us are cells within the great divine body of the Supreme Being as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, as well as plant life, animal life, and mineral life. And of course, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people only. So we have a divine function to execute within the great divine body of the Supreme Being, just like every cell in your body has a divine function to execute within the organ or organ system and the body as a whole. If it's not executing that function, of course, your body sends hormones, nutrients, and so forth in order to strengthen or fortify those cells so they can execute their function. The same thing happens with us. We're cells within the great divine body. We are drawn to specific clans. We need to be executing our divine function as individuals as well as clans. Because a collective of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, a collective of cells, are no different than a collective of cells within a glandular structure, and organ structure, and so forth. As they execute their independent functions are interdependent upon one another. They're supporting the gland or the organ, which is their direct parent. And as they support their direct parent, gland, or deity, Orisha, Abosom, they're supporting the great body, which is you, the great being at the same time. And the same is true for us. So when we become weak because of misinformed behavior, self-destructive behavior, opening up spiritual wounds, becoming parasitically infected, allowing parasitic entities, discarnate spirits, as well as criminal-type spirits like the white snarl spring or self-destructive Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit spirits who are falling off track, allowing those parasitic spirits to enter into the womb and create infection and so forth. When we become weakened, then the branch becomes weakened, and there's weakness within that collection of cells. So those hormonal secretions, those spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors are sent through, and if you think about it, you have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, 32 great-great-great-grandparents, 64 great-great-great-great, and then you get to 128, 256, 512, 1,024, even if you stop right there. That goes back just 8 or so generations. Less than 200 years, you're at 1,024 grandparents, meaning as an ancestral spirit above that line, you have 1,024 lines that you could possibly incarnate through. Through one of those lines you can come through. Many of those lines are branches of the tree that are very strong and so forth and resilient, but then you have some of those lines that are weaker, but they're all connected. So the weaker lines create tension and stress upon the stronger lines and so forth. So you'll be drawn into one of the weaker lines to strengthen that line. You make that decision as a spiritually cultivated ancestor or ancestress. You're going to place yourself in harm's way potentially. You're going to go into this specific clan. You know that once you incarnate into the womb, you're going to be, quote unquote, helpless or dependent upon the parents. And if they're part of that weaker clan, then they may put you in a position where you're going to be in harm's way. You may be put in a position where you end up transitioning, being killed as a child in a traumatic event. But you knew you were going into a burning building when you came through that clan, but you did it deliberately to strengthen the clan. If you survive and live into adulthood and you strengthen the clan throughout your growth and development, build institutions and so forth, you're building and strengthening the clan and the culture. If you transition and your spirit is taken away from the people at a very young age, 3, 4, 5 years old and so forth, your spirit goes right back to the ancestral realm where you just left 4 or 5 years prior. You're right back in the same space. And you can still guide your clan members from Asamando like you used to do. But what happens is because of that transformative experience and that traumatic experience, it typically serves to shock people into awareness, shock people out of the self-destructive behaviors that they were engaged in. If they're involved in ancestral religion or have some instinctive draw to pay attention to something that is so traumatic, it must be some kind of sign or signal that they need to pay attention to. They begin to change the course of their lives. They begin to bond tighter, forge greater bonds, facilitate a greater working relationship with one another, heal old wounds, as we said, and start building a stronger family branch, clan, and so forth. That's building a stronger environment, a stronger culture, so that when you reincarnate once again, you'll be reincarnating into a stronger branch that you helped build and fortify simply by making the decision to be reincarnated into that burning, quote-unquote, building and being taken out. They become stronger. They begin to engage in ancestral religion. They create a more harmonious environment for you and all others who will come through. Now, because of what you have done, because you put yourself in harm's way and went through that process, the result ultimately is the clan members building a strong clan environment that will not only facilitate your return in a positive capacity, but everyone else who comes through that branch will come through a stronger culture. And that strengthens all of the branches. This is what we're talking about when we talk about Bebra, when we talk about rebirth, from the true perspective, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit perspective. So when we talk about in our mundane lives, for example, Okunfo Ma'aka, warrior Ma'aka, called Micah Xavier Johnson, over a year ago, put himself in harm's way. He began to engage in ancestral religious practice and being empowered and guided by his ancestresses and ancestors, he stood up and waged war against the whites and their offspring and killed 5 white beasts, cops in Dallas, massacred them in one night. That's a tangible result, a tangible victory, a tangible triumph of ancestral religion. He took out 5 beasts that will no longer be able to oppress black people, falsely imprison black people, kill black people, torture black people, harass black people. He took these beasts off the field. 10 days later, Okunfo, Osar, Setep, and Ra, which they called Gavin Long, who was actually in Dallas the night that Okunfo Ma'aka, Micah Xavier Johnson, killed the cracker. He was in Dallas that same night. 10 days later, he was in Baton Rouge and he killed 3 more cops. So within 10 days, 8 cops, 8 beasts were taken off of the field. They did more in 10 days than these photo-op, pseudo-revolutionary Negroes waving red, black, and green flags and taking photo-ops with guns but never using them. They have done more in 10 days than these Negroes have done in 20 years. They removed beasts from the field. It's a tangible result, tangible, positive result. They placed themselves in harm's way because both of them were practicing ancestral religion and guided by their own Kra, and their Kra, the soul divine consciousness, the Ka, to execute the enemy. They were not concerned about Owu Berima and Owu Ba, the male and female forces of contraction, of so-called death, because they had a relationship with them. They looked forward to returning to the ancestral realm, to Asamando. But prior to returning to the ancestral realm, they sought to exterminate some of these beasts to free up some of our people and strike fear in the hearts of the remaining beasts, because they now don't know that if they make a certain decision, a negative decision to attack or harass or stalk a black person, they don't know if they're going to get smoked that same day. They don't know if they're just going to be sitting in their car and somebody walks up to them and blows their brains out, because they can't control how the Nsamanfo, the Nananom Nsamanfo, the ancestresses and ancestors who are spiritually cultivated, will direct one of our people who have never been engaged in any kind of so-called criminality, decides to get up one day and blow these crackers' brains out. They cannot control that. So when people get involved in ancestral religion, as we said earlier, whether you're dealing with oracular divination, you're a priest or priestess, whether you're a warrior, warrioress, whether you're engaged in some other aspect of the culture, you have a relationship with the male and female forces of divine contraction, of death. You're walking with them. You know who they are. They know who you are. They're guiding your steps just like Ma'at are guiding your steps, into Huti and Seshat are guiding your steps. When you get too close to the edge that you may cross over into Asamando prematurely, Owo, Berima, and Owo Ba will make sure to let you know that you're getting too close to the edge and it is not your time yet. We have a direct, solid relationship with them. They also assist us, as we said earlier, in helping to bring our enemies over through their chamber of death, through warfare, chemical and biological warfare, as well as spiritual warfare as well. But that spiritual warfare leads to tangible physical attacks and successful extermination of the enemy, as evidenced through Okunfo Ma'aka and Okunfo Osarsa Tepinra, Micah Johnson, and Gavin Long. And they are just two of many. They are just the beginning. There will be thousands of our people who engage in ancestral religion who will stand up and begin to execute our enemies on sight. And there's nothing that the enemy can do to stop that process. So our people will go into the quote-unquote burning building. They will go into a situation because they have no fear. When you communicate with the Nsamanfo on a regular basis, and you communicate with the ancestresses and ancestors on a daily basis, there is no fear of Owu Berima and Owu Ba. You know who they are. There's no fear of death. You're constantly dealing with the people who have made that transition. You know what the other side is like because they take you to the other side ritually on a regular basis, and you interface with them on a regular basis. So you have no fear. All you need to do is execute your function in creation, and when it is time for you to transition, you transition. But as long as you're executing your function, you can see what's taking place 2, 3, 4 steps ahead. So when you see people who are engaged and really committed to ancestral culture, developing people, transforming people's lives and so forth, moving in a certain fashion, attacking the enemy in various ways, exposing the enemy in various ways, people ask me, do you fear placing yourself in harm's way? Have you ever been challenged or threatened and so forth. We have no fear of any threats coming from the whites and their offspring, which they throw out there on a regular basis. We have no fear of threats coming from Negroes who serve the whites and their offspring. We have no fear of them either. We deal directly with the Aboson. We deal directly with the Nsamanfo. And when we deal with the Aboson, we're also dealing with Odwiraman and Odwiraba, those who govern that contractive process, who govern death itself. When you have a relationship with them, you have no fear of them. When you have a relationship with the Abosom and Nsamanfo, you have no fear of this minuscule criminal entity, the whites and their offspring. So we make these decisions. We make them to assist and develop our clan. So when you see certain traumatic experiences happening, sometimes, yes, it is a result of previous negative behavior, self-destructive behavior in previous existences, catching up with the individual because they're maneuvered and drawn into certain situations based on what they engaged in the past. But that is not always the case. Sometimes you're looking at an elder or an elderess, an honored elderess, venerable elderess who made the decision to return, to strengthen you and your clan, and that's exactly what happened. Through the trauma, there was a bonding. When people are paying attention, through the trauma, there was a bonding, the strengthening of the clan. And it's going to benefit not only the spirit that left and who will return as Akosan, but it will benefit every other ancestral spirit who comes through that branch as well. So we're going to take a few questions. If you have any questions or comments on the phone line, hit the number 1. If you have any questions in the chat room, of course, you can post those there. For those individuals who are unaware, which we mentioned in our previous broadcast, we have our Hapi Merit Hibernation Training, Cultural and Ritual Retreat, which is coming up in February, the weekend of February 16th, on Edisto Island in South Carolina, one of the Gullah Islands. We're going to be having the Odwiraman Afurakani Manhood Workshop based on our book, Odwiraman Afurakani Manhood, which I'll be conducting. The Obatan Afuraitkaitnit Womanhood Workshop, which is Dr. Iya Adwa. She will be conducting that. We'll also be doing the Ptah It's part of a vacation retreat, but it's a training, cultural, and ritual retreat for Odwiraman, the purified nation, Afuraitkaitnit people in North America, in the Western Hemisphere. We're building and restoring proper notions of Afurakani manhood, Afuraitkaitnit womanhood, so our people leaving the retreat, whether you work with Afurakani men and women, young adults or young people, or just within the capacity of your everyday life, you'll be able to conduct those workshops yourself. Ptah as well as Odwiraman and Obatan, facilitating those, but also strengthening your own sense of Afurakani manhood and Afuraitkaitnit womanhood rooted in our ancestral religious values and so forth. So this is strengthening the Afurakani man and Afuraitkaitnit woman in Odwiraman because that's the foundation of strong families. Strong families are the foundation of the Oman, the nation. Strong families are the foundation of Amaniye nation building, dealing with nationism, and ancestral nation building restoration. So we have a couple of spaces left. Yesterday we talked about having 4 spaces. Now we have 3. There were a couple of cancellations a few days ago, which opened up 4 spaces for the registration. So we opened up the registration once again. It had previously been closed. We have 4 spaces that opened up. Someone took one of the spaces yesterday, so we have 3 spaces left open. Once those 3 spaces are taken, then registration will be closed once again permanently. So if you would like to attend the retreat, go to the Hapi Merit page on our website, and you'll see all of the details. You'll see the details about the presentations and so forth and what the retreat is about. Talking about Hapi and Merit, the male and female forces of the inundation. Talking about hibernation when we go into this period spiritually to regroup and tool ourselves and so forth. So when we emerge around the autumn, the Fete Obere, the beautiful time, the spring equinox, then we come forward and bring this information out that we have renewed in this hibernation period to benefit our clans. So you'll see all of that detailed information. You'll also see the link for the registration. You can see the 2 video trailers that we posted for the information and so forth. Okay, we're going to take a phone call. Michiawa on the phone line. Number 2081, you had a question or comment?
Greetings, Kwesi. I'm trying to remember the question. I was going to say, this was supposed to be for yesterday's, I'm sure. It came to mind. In regards to, you said something about relationships, partially in, I think, last night's broadcast. And the question I have to ask is, in regards to black men and black women, Afurakani men, African women, in regards to relationships, and how they are more trying to draw themselves more away. And I find that some of them make, like, say, I guess, excuses why they want to draw themselves away. I wonder if, what's the word? African, ancestral, I guess, to shrine to correct that, I guess, pullingness of some of them that feel they don't want to be a part of each other and try to look elsewhere in regards to relationships as non-black people. I don't know if it makes sense if you want to rephrase it. Sure.
Right. Exactly. So the question being, some people making excuses to be drawn to other quote-unquote races, interracialism, and so forth. And you're asking if ancestral religious practice can assist that. Of course, that is the only thing that will really ground people in their divine function. So we have a divine function. You have a kayak, the soul, the divine consciousness, and so forth, the divinity dwelling in the head region. When you align your thoughts, intentions, and actions with that force in your head region, then you're executing your function properly. You're being drawn towards things, objects, deeds, and entities you need to embrace, and being repulsed from things, objects, deeds, and entities, and events and circumstances that you do not need to embrace or interface with, and so forth. If we become disaligned from the Kra, the soul, the divine consciousness, then we have the ritual process, the ritual incorporation of divine law, the ritual restoration of divine balance. That's what ancestral religion is, whether we're engaged in libation or ritual song, ritual dance, ritual meditation, and so forth, as a gateway to propel ourselves into the spirit realm so we can reconstitute ourselves and become more receptive to the divinity in our head region, and receptive to the abosom that govern our patria clans and mantra clans, and receptive to the NHOMA and Samanfo, who are always trying to give us information, but sometimes we block it out, or we ignore it, or we make ourselves less receptive. So when we engage the ritual process, we open that receptivity up once again. When we open up that receptivity, we become realigned, and then we are only attractive to that which is orderly and repulse anything that's disordered. No person that's operating in harmony with divine order can possibly be attracted to a non-Afurakani, non-Afuraitkaitnit individual, because they are spirits of disorder. They incarnated spirits of disorder because they do not have a krawa. They also do not have a ba or ba'at. So they are spirits of disorder that are repulsive by nature. There's no exception to that reality. Like two magnets repelling each other across the table, there's no exception to that reality. So whether it's a white European, white American, white Hindu, white Arab, white Asian, white pseudo-Native American, which are just Asians who invaded here, white Hispanic, white Latino, Latina, and so forth, all of these individuals incarnated spirits of disorder. So it is impossible to be attracted to these spirits of disorder unless you're out of order. Just like it's not natural for you to be attracted to snorting cocaine. You don't have a natural inclination to grab some powder and breathe it into your nose. You have to force your body to accept that self-destructive behavior, and even then your body is trying to build up a tolerance so it can survive while you're engaged in that stupid behavior, but it's still not a natural attraction. Your body is just trying to survive until you can finally snap out of engaging in that foolish behavior, but it's not building up a desire or tolerance. You've created a pseudo-attraction, which is not real, and you're destroying yourself every moment of every day that you're engaged in that practice. The same is true dealing with the whites and their offspring, like cocaine or heroin and so forth. Anytime you're engaged with and uniting with a spirit of disorder, you're incorporating disorder into your life. If you continue to engage that process, then the deity that dwells in your head region, which is a spirit of order, they will not dwell in disorder. You're not going to make a spirit of order dwell in disorder, so they will separate themselves from you so the Kra can separate. It can separate from you and you become disaligned. You're like a person with their head cut off, a chicken with its head cut off. Your behavior is very self-destructive and erratic. You can engage the ritual process to bring your Kra to take up residence back in the head region, but if you persist in the disorder, you will repel the Kra, and that deity will separate itself from you permanently and return to Inyamewa, Inyame, the Supreme Being, and now you will be a spirit without a Kra. You're no different than one of the whites in their offspring. Most of our people never get to that point. Most of our people are simply disaligned from the Kra, the Krawa, and they're engaged in self-destructive behavior on a regular basis, so sometimes they become mentally ill. And of course, whether it's dissexuality, homosexuality, or embracing interracialism, that's a manifestation of a spiritual disalignment, mental illness, because you're engaged in self-destructive, disaligned behavior. When you engage in ritual practice, you get back in harmony with order. That is the only means by which you can realign yourself. Once you realign yourself, you naturally repel the whites and their offspring. You never had a natural desire for them in any way, whether it's physically, visually, or spiritually. So yes, ancestral religion deals with that. And it also talks about this notion of revolution and resolution. Those individuals who are healers, warriors, divine killers, and so forth, people who are engaged in the process of awakening our people, strengthening our people, fortifying our people. Most people in a society don't focus on the military or the police and so forth. They get up and go to work and do what they do every day to maintain the society and maintain the economy and the social structures and so forth. However, if they did not have a military, then other nations could come in here and bomb and do everything else. So the military is always on watch, always protecting the nation so that you can operate in this fashion where you don't think about the military. You just go do what you're doing and become entertained and have fun and go to work and so forth because you don't have to worry about security. But there are some people that must be focused on security 100% of the time. Your immune and lymphatic system cells are focused on security and defense 100% of the time so that the other cells can just do what they need to do. There are certain people within the Afuraitkaitnit community who are focused on security and defense 100% of the time, whether they're engaged physically against the whites and their offspring while constantly building the spiritual immunity, psychological, emotional, mental immunity of the people so we don't become weak and open to these spirits of disorder, so we're transforming people through culture and different means and so forth, educational-wise, institution-building-wise and so forth, always defending those kinds of individuals who embrace Nyansa, revolution and resolution and so forth. Some of them are also those kinds of individuals who in that process will place themselves in harm's way deliberately. So when you talk about relationships, that's a factor that must be taken into consideration when people are entering into relationships, holistic relationships. If you're one of those individuals, you need to make sure when you connect with another individual that they understand that you are one of those individuals. And you may be in a position to place yourself in harm's way for the betterment of the Afuraitkaitnit Oman. And when your potential mate is one of those individuals as well, they understand that because they are on the same frequency, so that they have no fear. But if someone is not on the same frequency, they fear when you put yourself in harm's way or put your organization in harm's way and so forth because they can't understand what you're engaged in. So that has implications for revolutionary, resolutionary relationships as well. So yes, on one hand, ancestral religion protects against people who are engaged in self-destructive interracialism situations. It also protects and strengthens the unions of those who are males and females who are revolutionary, resolutionary, Osan Safo, and so forth, as we say, those who understand the dynamics of death and rebirth, transition and return, have a relationship with Owo Berima and Owo Ba, a holistic, healthy relationship with the male and female forces of divine contraction or death, and their relationship to the Abosom who operate in their lives, and their non-insurmountable, their spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. All those things are taken into consideration when we talk about relationships.
Okay. You get me? What is it?
Yep.
Hello? Yeah. Okay.
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. That's very good. And I think the other, and this is probably my last question. In regard to, actually, the thing with the Michael Johnson and the other bird that went on the war with the Odwirafo a year ago or 2 years ago, they were more into their culture, or was they following the shrine, or was like they had that surge to just go at the Odwirafo? That's my last question.
So what happened with both of them, they began to get involved in ancestral religion closer to their great triumphant, actions. So as they got closer to that, they began to get involved in ancestral religion. They began to communicate with their Nsamamfo. As you see, the brother so-called Gavin Long, he had already taken on the name Alsar, Setep, and Ra. He had studied certain things in certain different organizations, but then he began to move towards authentic ancestral religion. That's when he made his move. Ma'aka, so-called Micah Xavier Johnson, at first he was involved in certain, Pan-African and Black nationalist kinds of organizations, but then he began to get involved in ancestral religious practice later on, and that's when he became fortified, and that's when he made his move.
Okay. All right, my dad said thank you for answering my question. Till next time.
Okay. Yanni, I'll say that. We appreciate the call. Okay, so we have one more call on the phone line. Michelle on the phone line, number 7071. You had a question or comment?
Michelle, beautiful Kwesi. My question is in regard to, based on what you answered in the previous question and other broadcasts that you talked about with suffering and things like that, and you talked about a trauma can bring you together, a bonding. When you have spoken about, like, a lot of times when we're suffering, a lot of times that comes out of our own disorder, our own imbalance. But you know how, like, sometimes people say, oh, well, I needed to go through that lesson to learn, or I need to do this or that. Like, explain a little bit, are some of these lessons really divine, or do they only become or seem like they're divine based on the fact that we're learning from them and that we haven't come out of a bad situation, out of our suffering, and how we had to learn out of our suffering between the part that, seems to be the divine part, or is it just something that's unnecessary and we're going through these things because of the fact that we're imbalanced?
Right. So, and you touched on what we mentioned in the beginning of the broadcast when we talked about the nature of Debra, rebirth, reincarnation from a true perspective, because what we hear from Hindus and Buddhists and pseudo-New Age spiritualists and pseudo-esotericists and so forth, and black people have grafted that misinformation into what they consider spirituality. So yes, as you said, you will hear people say, well, I had to go through this and it was all in divine order. And if I didn't go through this, this is what the deities put me through in order to get to this point. And they didn't. It wasn't all in divine order. So Ma'a and Ma'at, the male and female forces of divine law, when you attuned to them, they were directing you to engage in a certain set of behaviors. You didn't do that, and you went in the other direction. So you rejected divine order and went against divine order. Then you suffered the consequences. But when you wanted to try to repair yourself, then you went back to Ma'an Ma'at to incorporate law and then learn how to restore balance and get back on track. And yes, you learned something along the way, but it wasn't because Ma'an Ma'at or your Insamafo put you in a negative situation, like they put you in a situation so you can become molested as a child, or put you in a situation where, you know, something else happened in a traumatic fashion. Or as an adult, you get put in a situation where you were in a car crash and the deities made you crash the car so you could suffer. That's not what happened. You went against what the deities were doing, so you stepped out of divine order. So it wasn't all in divine order. If you were all in divine order, you would have followed Ma'an Ma'at. But since you did not, you set yourself up for, you know, some disorder and some suffering. But if you are wise enough to realize once you're in the midst of the suffering that the best way to and only way to alleviate that suffering and to, you know, come out of it is to reconnect with Ma'an Ma'at, then yes, you can learn something along the way. That this is part of that sleight of hand of these pseudo-spiritualists where they try to make you believe that everything taking place is your fault. That comes from Hinduism in the East and the pseudo-spiritual traditions in the East, as well as in the West with Christianity, Islam, and so forth. They have the same message, but they just say it in different ways. They'll say that God made you suffer because you didn't, you know, embrace Yahweh or Jesus or these other fictional cartoon characters. They say that in the West, and you're suffering because of what you have done, and you're being punished and cursed because of that, and you need to obey the fictional cartoon character white God and their fake religion. In the East, they say, well, you did this in previous lifetimes. They'll say the Dalits, the black so-called untouchables in India, they're suffering because they did negative things in previous lifetimes, and they just need to live out their karma, and they shouldn't think about retaliating against the whites and their offspring because they brought all this on themselves anyway, and it's a spiritual, repercussion with regard to karma, which is totally inaccurate. And if we believe that, that allows the whites and their offspring to maintain white rule and domination. They know it's not true. It's never been true. But the way to control us is to make us believe that anything that is happening in a negative fashion, we brought it on ourselves, and we cannot blame properly the source, which is the whites and their offspring, and we won't seek to attack them and eradicate them. That secures them in their rule over the dominant population. We're the majority population, they're the minority. The only way they can make us continue to be, docile is to make us believe that spiritually we deserve to suffer. So, and it runs all throughout their fake traditions. And then a lot of our people repeat that. So it's two different things taking place. When we get out of harmony with divine order, we create suffering for ourselves. If we dwell in that disorder, then we become conditioned within that disorder, and then we create more suffering for ourselves and so forth, and then it manifests as karmic repercussions and things like that because we've stepped away from divine order. But when we get back in harmony with divine order, then we manifest that. And then when we become strong and fortified and so forth, we may make a decision to place ourselves in harm's way deliberately to retrieve our people or fortify people or strengthen our people and so forth. And if we suffer and transition in the process, then we go right back to the ancestral realm instantly, no problem, because we know what's taking place, and that helps to fortify the community on another level. So either way, we still win in that process, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Marasa.
Okay. Yeni Aseda. We appreciate the call. Okay. And for that aspect of that notion of transcarnational, intergenerational, and transcarnational suffering, again, you can go to the broadcast we did on the publication that we published, Amani Hunu, Overcoming Intergenerational and Transcarnational Suffering. So that was dealing specifically with when we, through our own conditioning, stepping away from divine order. It's not all in divine order, but stepping away from divine order, the kind of, situations we place ourselves in. No different than if you decided to stop eating fruits and vegetables and drinking, spring water and just decided to just start drinking whiskey and using drugs, you're going to place yourself in a very negative physiological state. And you can't say, well, it was all in divine order. The deities made me go through being a crackhead and everything else so I could learn something. They did not. They were trying to keep you away from that, but you rejected them and went in that direction anyway. So it wasn't in divine order. But once you decided to come out of it, once you reconnected with the Abosom, then they can help draw you out of it and see the missteps that you made, and you can help other people in the process. But that Amani Hunu document and related broadcast goes into detail about that aspect of it. And, of course, tonight we're talking about those who make that conscious decision to assist the clan. Okay, Michio on the phone line. You had a question or a comment?
Yes,
number 3011.
Yeah, Michio Ojiro Kwesi and Ojiro Nation. My question was not. Well, it is a question regarding to to the spiritual models for the spiritual talisman that we use or sacred instruments that we use to channel in spirits into our realm of conjuring when bringing in children into the world. Like the reason why I'm bringing this up is that we deal with the Akura dolls, right? We deal with the Akura dolls when we have births, bringing in warriors and warrioresses into this realm of existence. But right now, since I deal with a lot of art and stuff like that, I see that they're making the dolls away from using wood instruments to using plastic, and then instead of using plastic, they're trying to simulate our dolls by making white dolls with white faces, so our children get distracted from being attached to the wood and the earth that went into making those Akura dolls. So it's a way of covering the path to return home. I don't know. I just was just lingering on that right there for the past couple of days. I was lingering with that. Could you build on that with us?
Yeah,
with me?
That's a good question. That's a good point, because that's exactly what they're doing. And the response and the approach is two-pronged approach. Number one, it's natural for us to utilize the elements that we have in the region of the Earth Mother upon which we dwell, in this region of her body, whether it's plant life or mineral life or, animal life, whether it's fur or, minerals, stones, wood and so forth, different things that we utilize, crops and growing cotton and things like that to manufacture various implements that we use for any aspect of our ritual practice. We're on this region of the Earth Mother. We have learned to interface with her region on this region of her body, the unique expression of energy of the Earth Mother in this region, that Afuraitkaitnit people, black people in the Western Hemisphere who were forced into this region during enslavement. But once we came to this region, we were naturally drawn by our ancestresses and ancestors to coalesce in certain areas and interface with Asase Afu and Asasia, the twin Earth Mother divinities, so we can extract elements from her in a harmonious fashion for medicine, for healing, for ritual practice, and so forth. We use those elements that is natural for us. So anything that we engage in ritually and culturally, we should be fashioning ourselves. We shouldn't be dependent on the whites and their offspring for that. Whether it's just a basic use of sticks or stones on shrines and so forth, or some of our people are more artistic and they fashion, dolls and different things like that, we need to utilize our own resources, meaning the resources talking about the elements from Asase Afo and Asase Ya right here where we stand. For example, our sister Ama Asase Ajay, she creates ritual dolls as part on her Hoodoo Womb website and Asase Heals website. You'll see that she creates those ritual dolls herself, and she handcrafts those dolls specifically for each specific customer according to their needs, according to their spiritual needs. So we need to begin to engage that process. That has always been our natural approach, whether we're practicing the Akan tradition in North America, which is hoodoo, the Yoruba tradition, which is juju in North America, Wanga, which is the Ovambo tradition, voodoo, which is Fon and Ebe, as we brought these ancestral religious traditions in our blood circles here and have maintained them intergenerationally and transcarnationally for the past 300 plus years, we always utilize the elements of Asase Afo and Asase Ya, the Earth Mother divinities, for our ritual practices. It's only been recently, over the past less than 100 years, that our people began to start purchasing implements from the whites and their offspring who are marketing in these things. And, of course, you read that information in the book Mojo Working by Dr. Katrina Hazard, and she's talking about ancestral religion and old black belt hoodoo and so forth, and talks about how the white marketeers began to market, quote-unquote hoodoo supplies and, these frauds like LuckyMojo.com, which is run by a cracker, female cracker, selling pseudo hoodoo implements, which is nonsensical and making millions of dollars off of that. She talks about that information in her book and so forth. So we understand that and we get away from that. We've always practiced in the hoodoo tradition, the juju tradition, the Wanga tradition, the Grigori tradition, our traditions here, just like we did on the continent wherever we've been, to utilize elements in nature. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is our mindset as black people in North America, even when we think we have become Afrocentric or African-centered, but we haven't yet fully manifested ourselves as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, because when we do that, we have a full perspective. But if we think we're Afrocentric or African-centered, and we realize we need to get back involved in ancestral religion, because that's the key to Afrocentrism in the real sense. You can't be an atheist and an Afrocentrist or a secular nationalist or a secular Pan-Africanist and really be African-centered. That means you really don't understand what being centered in Afuraitkaitnit really is. But some of our people become awakened to a certain extent, and they understand the reality that if you want to be involved in ancestral religion or Afrocentrism, you must be involved in ancestral religion. But then the block comes, and the block is they still have an inferiority complex, and they believe that black people in North America don't know anything, haven't preserved anything, we're inferior, and the people on the continent are superior in spirituality and culture to us. So we believe that the only way we can practice ancestral religion is to import it from the continent or go there, get initiated by somebody who's there, or through people who have been initiated by people who are there, or even people in the Caribbean and so forth. We think that unless it comes from the continent or from the Caribbean or South America, somewhere, anywhere other than North America, then it must not be authentic. We don't have anything. We can't communicate with any Orisha, Abosom, Vodou, and so forth unless we go to somebody else because we are spiritually inferior. That's pure stupidity. But we have that inferior mindset. And therefore, even when we get involved in ancestral religion or quote-unquote African traditional religions and so forth, we think it's only authentic to purchase Akwamu dolls and drums and staffs and ritual vessels and so forth. We have to purchase them from the continent or somebody who brought, these implements from the continent, or else we can't practice our tradition. Some of us even think that unless we import clothes from the continent, then we're not African-centered. And that's insane. So we're sitting around in the country and we can't clothe ourselves. We have to wait for clothes to be shipped thousands of miles from another continent, or else we can't clothe ourselves. That's ridiculous. We can't get wood and fashion a ritual doll. We can't get wood and fashion a bowl and so forth. That's absurd. That comes from an inferiority complex. We've been fashioning Akwamu dolls since we've been here. In our Akan culture, they're called hoodoo doll babies. in Ebe and Fong culture, Louisiana voodoo and so forth, voodoo dolls and so forth, but we've been fashioning these forms ever since we've been here. And of course, as people who have been attuned to the work that we're doing understand, we first brought forward an Akhuamuman doll at our first annual Hoodoo Nation Festival back in October of 13,017, which is in the Gregorian calendar is 13,016, which is in the Gregorian calendar is 2015 and so forth, when we first had our first annual Hoodoo Mind Festival. And we just had the third annual Hoodoo Mind Festival this past October, a couple of months ago. But the first one, we brought forward an Akhuamuman doll that was fashioned in Virginia in the 1700s by one of our ancestresses. And we were able to recover that artifact, and now as part of our shrine, we have brought her back home. And one of our sisters who just published something online, she did the same thing and recovered an ancestral artifact as well and brought that back to her home. But we have these, that just proves that for the past 300 years we've been fashioning these ritual implements. That is part of our culture. We can recover those artifacts that are hundreds of years old, that are buried in the soil here or in auction houses and so forth, being sold as African-American slave dolls and African-American slave implements and so forth. We can recover some of those because they were fashioned by the hands of our ancestresses and ancestors here, but we can also fashion them ourselves and go to those individuals who have been inspired to fashion ritual implements here today. Asase Ajay, who spoke at the Hoodoo Mind Festival, presented at the Hoodoo Mind Festival. She fashions dolls and ritual implements. Afia Asase Bretuo, who owns Enchanted Pharmacy. She also presented at the Hoodoo Mind Festival, and we're going to be posting their presentations this week. She fashions ritual implements as well. Amit Sankofawa out of Georgia. She's developing that process as well. So we have individuals who are fashioning, our ritual implements. That's part of our inherited culture, our transcarnational culture right here in North America. So that's a very important point you brought forward.
Menashe.
Okay, Yeni Aseda. Appreciate the call. Okay, so we're going to take one more call before we finish up. Michiwa on the phone line, number 9440. You had a question or a comment?
Michiwa, Brother Kwesi. I caught, I listened to the whole broadcast, but you made a specific point when you were talking about reincarnation, when the adult spirit comes back into the womb and then is, developing and born into the body of a baby. You caught my attention when you mentioned that a mother, immediately becomes in tune with the child. So if the child cries or, gestures, the mother knows, what that means. And it kind of struck me a certain way because I think myself and most mothers, we really do feel like we're in tune with our child. And we are. We know, when they make a certain face, when they do certain things. My question is, when my children were younger, I felt 100% in tune with them, physically, spiritually, just as a whole. But as time has gone on, I used to homeschool my kids. Now they're in, traditional public school, and they're interfacing, with our people. But, of course, they're interfacing with our enemies as well. And so I don't feel that connection anymore. And I'm bringing that up to say when I do my prayer, my meditation, when I go to the shrines, I'm trying to get that connection back, so that I can guide them spiritually, and get them where they need to be. So I know they will remember if I can help them. So when I go to the shrine, I'm praying to, I have sons, so I'm praying to Nanamintu, and I'm praying to their Kratimbo songs, their specific Kratimbo song. My question is, how can we help our children, through this? They've reincarnated as adult spirits. they've had these experiences, some of which maybe we have hindered, them kind of catching back up or coming into speed. What do we do to spiritually align with them so we can help them?
Well, actually, so what you are doing, so it starts off like when you said earlier when they were younger, you were in tune and so forth. Even if you didn't know much about ancestral culture, normally the benchmarks that we have laid out, whether it's the 7th day or the 8th day, when we have a Dinto or a naming ceremony, that's a fusion point. When we begin to take our children on their Krada, their soul day, every year, once they get to, for us, once they get to like 3 years old and start taking them out to the river, first couple of years, we cleanse their head ritually at the shrine, but once they, reach 3 years old, then we take them to the river every year on their Krada, their soul day, quote-unquote birthday, to cleanse their head and invoke the divinity. Do that to the point, until they reach adolescence and they cross over into manhood and womanhood, and then they can go to the river and engage that process and invoke the divinity themselves, because they have the infrastructure now physiologically wherein they can bring an ancestral spirit back into the world, because their reproductive organs have developed to the point where they have the capacity now to wield the energy of the patriclan abosom and matriclan abosom to bring an ancestral spirit back into the world. So now, since they can wield that energy, they can also invoke that divinity on their own behalf. Prior to that, the parents would invoke it, especially on that particular day for them, but now they can do that at least on that day. And even prior to that, reaching around the 14th to 15th year, but for us, the 7th year, we give them their own Kradim Bosom Shrine around the time they're 7, so they can start doing that on a weekly basis, a little basic cleansing of the Kra and sitting with the shrine and so forth. So you have these different benchmarks, and then you have, in between that, throughout the course of the year, group ritual, which assists in keeping people on track. But if you don't have that, because we haven't been engaged in it, and most of our people have not, we didn't grow up in ancestral culture for the most part. Some people had certain aspects that they did in the hoodoo and juju and various traditions, and some people didn't. But now we're getting back involved in it to a large degree, and establishing those benchmarks, but then also establishing group ritual on certain days, like a Kwesi Adai or Wuku Adai, or different specific days that you're drawn to, days connected with the Abosom, connected to their Akradin and so forth, their soul names, the divinities connected to those days. Group ritual helps to get them back in alignment. And because you did something when they were younger, that connection was and bond was strengthened. So even when they leave you, your invocations when you're at the shrine and they're out in the world are also impactful as well. So even if they stray away to a certain extent, your invocations while they're gone, you're working on them while they're gone. They don't know that, but you're working on them on a regular basis while they're gone. You work on them when you're with them, but when they leave, you work on them as well. And even if they stray to a certain extent, they'll be drawn back in, because they won't be able to eclipse, that energy to a certain extent. They won't be able to get beyond that orbit that you're generating at the shrine, that magnetosphere you're generating at the shrine. They may get close to the, circumference, close to the edge, but they won't break that field.
Right.
So, but the more group ritual you can engage in, at certain times of the, month or throughout the course of the year, then that helps as well.
So the last piece of that question I want to answer. So right now, I'm praying for them. Now I'm into in their each one of their specific Kradim Bosom. Would there be an instance where I would actually pray to their cry, their specific cry, individual cry? Because right now I'm just, like I said, I'm doing Nanaman 2, and I do their specific Kradim Bosom for the three of them, and then I do our Matriclan and Patriclan, deities as well. I'm just, we do libation every week on Benada. That just kind of is the day that I can get everybody in the same place at the same time, and we do libation to various deities, but specifically to the 42 ambassadors of Ma'at. I just don't know if I should be interfacing with their with their cry. That's kind of what I'm trying to clarify.
No, you don't have to invoke their own cry, because what happens is when you provoke the energy of the Kradim boson and you strengthen that bond and renew the bonds with that energetically, renew those bonds. Every time you invoke a divinity, you're renewing and strengthening the bonds that you have energetically with them. And if you stray away from that, then the bond becomes a little bit weaker. They're still there, of course, but you want to become more receptive. And the more you invoke them, the more receptive you are to their energy that's constantly radiating. So you just open yourself up more, and you do the same thing with them. So as long as you're invoking the Kradim boson, then the Kradim boson will impact their cry.
Okay. Thank you, Brother Chris. Madase.
Okay. We appreciate the call. Only time you're really, one is invoking the cry or the ori inu of another individual is when you're engaged in an oracular function, divination. You're performing adebisa for the individual, and what you're really doing is you're divining their cry. And of course, the abosom and insamampo, the orisha and the gungun, the voodoo and kuvito will come forward and confirm and show you, as well as show the individual, what is actually in the cry of the individual and what their function is and what how out of alignment they are, so that you can show them externally what their cry has been trying to show them internally. So that's the only time you're really invoking someone else's cry or krawa, is when you're engaged in that oracular function, performing that oracular function for someone. All right, so it's only a few minutes left in the broadcast, so we're going to end the broadcast here. But again, if you have any questions or comments, email us. We talked about last night our Black Swan Life movement, the T-shirts that we have. When you look at the website, the Black Swan Life T-shirts and the movement associated with that, we're trying to get to that specific number so we can print the T-shirts, the first batch out. With the black printer, we have to get to a certain number so we can have that bulk number so that we can engage that process. So if you have not yet purchased one of the T-shirts for your mother, sister, daughter, aunt, niece, cousin, woman, girlfriend, and so forth, you can do so for this birthday gifts or whatever. When you look at the philosophy behind Black Swan Life, reestablishing our proper understanding of Sefel, or beauty from an Afuraitkaitnit, Afurakani perspective, dealing with Het Heru, the manifestation of divine order, which is harmony, expressed through beauty that changes our entire mindset and the way we operate, interface with one another, balancing our relationships, balancing our health, spiritual, mental, and emotional health, and so forth. So that Black Swan Life movement is very critical for our people. So check those T-shirts out, support that movement. We want to order those T-shirts as soon as possible from the black printer. We don't want to have to use the white printer, who's much cheaper, but if we can get a certain number of shirts through the black printer, then we can order them in bulk and we can start that process. So please go to the site, odwirafo.com/blackswanlife.html, and you will see all of the information. And you can order your shirts there, and Yedase to the individuals who have ordered shirts so far. So again, Yedase, we thank you for tuning into the broadcast, and Yebeshi Abio, we will meet again.